Okay, good evening. Welcome to this latest version of episode of Building the Scottish State. I have with me this evening Pete Ritchie, who is a farmer and very involved in Scotland achieving food sovereignty. And so, first of all, Pete, thank you for being with us this evening. It's a great pleasure to have you on.
Oh, it's great to be here, Mark.
Okay, thanks. So just tell us about yourself. What, you're a farmer, tell me a little bit about your career and how you got in the organizations that you're a part of, and what, and then we'll get into what is meant by food sovereignty. So just give us a little introduction.
Well, thanks, Mark. Sure. So I don't have a career. One of these days I'm going to find out what I'm going to do when I grow up. But meanwhile, and for the last 30 years, 25 years, I've set up and run organizations because I couldn't get a job. So that felt like the only way I was going to get gainfully employed. So I set up and run Nourish Scotland, which is a food policy organization. It really.
Sorry, say the name again.
It's Nourish Scotland.
Nourished Scotland. Okay.
Nourish Scotland. Yeah. And who could be against nourishing Scotland? I mean, it's a sort of easy name. It's a bit like animal welfare or community care. It's Nourish Scotland. Good name. And we're a food policy organization, and we basically read across all the different bits of the food system, because some people are interested in food and climate change, food and nature, animal welfare, health, whether we're eating the right sort of food, getting our veg. Some people are interested in food security. Some people are interested in, workers' rights in the food system. Some people are interested in our food, where we get food from, and trade standards, and, water. And so food system's really complicated. It's the biggest human system in the world. It has huge impact on the environment. And we're trying to get all those different bits of food policy and sort of squidge them into something that makes a bit of sense. So that's our job in Nourish. And then when I'm not doing that, I run a small farm in the Scottish borders.
Okay. And what is the contents of your farm? What have you farmed in the past, and what are you currently farming?
Yeah. So at the moment we just got suckler beef herd. So for people who don't know, if you have suckler cows, that means you basically have you're growing just for beef. So you have a cow. She has a calf every year. She looks after the calf. When it gets to a couple of years old, it's you either breed from that or it goes for meat. So we're not dairy cows. We'd love to do dairy cows, but it's more work, more complicated. We used to have pigs on the farm. We were lovely, beautiful, but a lot of work. And because we had them outdoors, they kept escaping, which is a bit of a hazard of free-range pigs. And then we had some sheep, and we used to do turkeys for Christmas too. But we sort of cut back a bit because my son left the farm and he's now doing a different sort of job. So we sort of made the farm a bit simpler, and then we do some vegetables, but pretty much all the veg we do are inside polytunnels, because basically where we are, we're quite high up and we're quite windy, we're quite exposed, and the soil's not ideal for veg. So, but once you get things in a polytunnel, basically you can kid yourself you're in Spain. You can do anything like in a polytunnel, So.
And so, what veggies have you? So you're not currently doing vegetables, or you're only?
We're doing a few veg this year. I know not everybody here is listening from Scotland, but as everybody from Scotland knows, basically it's dark half the year and then it's light half the year. So nothing happens until about May, where we are anyway, and then suddenly everything takes off. So nothing was happening in May. It was a very cold May this year, but now we've got peppers and we've got tomatoes, we've got cucumbers, we've got all the stuff you can grow really well in a polytunnel. That's all and you go from having not enough to having too much in about a week. So that's what we do.
Okay. All right. And do you farm biologically or
we're an organic farm, so we don't
organic. Yeah. We say biologique in France.
Biologique, yeah, that's right. We're biologique, definitely. And and then we sell pretty much all the stuff that we produce through the farm shop, and we do sort of veg boxes, and we do deliveries to people too. So.
Okay. And do you do you have much? What kind of culture is in Scotland of like local farm? We in France have like every day there's a marché somewhere around Rennes, and it's just delightful. We go on all these vendors with just beautiful produce and strawberries and all that. Do you have that in Scotland, or
it's really different? Yeah, it's really different, and you can go back to lots of different reasons for that. We don't have a sort of quite the same market town setup that you have in most of Europe, and even in parts of England, where that historic between where people come to the market. We've had livestock markets, but part of it is the structure of Scottish farming. We have a lot of big farms, and what happens then is they have to sell to the multiples, because for them going to a market isn't sort of, what they do. They have 100 tons of strawberries, not a ton. So the only way they can then sell those is they get a contract with one of the supermarkets. Then they need a 24/7, 365 days a year contract. So then they have to buy a farm in Spain that can give them strawberries when they don't have strawberries in Scotland. And you get into this whole, scale thing. But then those farms, they're not really interested in coming to a farmer's market somewhere. So you have to sort of, we're much more disconnected in terms of our food system between the country and the city than somewhere like France. And, that manifests itself in lots of different ways. But what we always say, Mark, is that, if Napoleon had won, we wouldn't have so many problems in terms of land ownership and that. Because people sort of remember Napoleon and the battles, but what Napoleon actually did was major land reform and, and introduced this sort of, so the pattern of sort of small farms that you see in Europe, was a result of some of the Napoleonic reforms. We didn't get reformed. So we still have this very weird land system where very few people own, most of the land. And we've also ended up with a system where farms in Scotland tend to be fairly large, and it's very hard for small farmers to get started. So
okay. And what are the principal vegetables that are grown in Scotland?
So we grow mashed potatoes. We export seed potatoes all over the world. We're really good at seed potatoes, and that's partly because we're far north. So some of the diseases that you'll get, with seed potatoes, you have to be really disease free. You have to be clean as clean can be, because obviously you're selling a seed. You don't want that to bring a disease into another country. So seed potatoes have to be really, really clean. We're sort of very good at seed potato exports all over the world. We do quite a lot of carrots and peas in the northeast in particular. Carrots do really well on a sort of sandy soil. So up in the Black Islands, we've got some big carrot growers, pea growers for the sort of frozen pea market. Then sort of East Lothian and stuff, we've got leeks and Swedes. So basically it runs down the east coast, East Lothian, Fife, Aberdeen, and then up to the Black Isle. We've got some really great veg producers. So we produce a lot more veg than we need to eat in Scotland. But like a lot of countries, we don't eat our veg. We grow them, but don't necessarily eat them.
I know, and that's one thing that kind of has fascinated me about Scotland, because I remember I spent some time in the early '90s, and I was just kind of amazed at how greasy this was in the east end of Glasgow, but how greasy the chippy or whatever, all of these different really, really high fat foods. And wondering, but from what I observed, it was getting a good just getting good access to fresh vegetables was problematic in some, especially in the more deprived areas. So is there? But has vegetable consumption gone up, and is there a good tradition with really good vegetarian food?
Oh, lots of questions in there. One of the things we always say, and it relates to this sort of food sovereignty issue, is that what happened in Scotland, we always say you have to go back in history to understand these patterns, because it's no good looking at what's happening now and think, oh, well, that's because the people are weird, or because, you have to understand where it comes from. So what happened in Scotland between 1750 and 1850, Scotland went from being one of the most rural countries in Western Europe to being the second most urban. So behind the Netherlands, it became a highly urbanized country. And this wasn't a sort of gradual move. This was people basically being kicked off the land initially in the south of Scotland, and then in the north of Scotland, moving into Glasgow, living in really poor housing. 10 kids, no kitchen, and that's why. So we invented fast food, even before the Italians went to New York and invented the pizza. We invented fast food. We invented the jam sandwich. We invented sliced bread. We invented jam made with marrows because it was cheaper. We invented fast food and cheap food,
because that was what mid 19th mostly, or what would the
mid 19th century. And the other thing which is interesting is the gender issue. A lot of the jobs in Glasgow and Dundee, which the cities in Scotland which had the the most sort of endemic poverty, the jobs were done by women. They were textile workers. They were so you had women who went to work, and you'd like to think that the men stayed home and cooked, nice vegetables for the kids, but they didn't, as it happened. So you've got this breaking of food culture, and also a real breaking of the link between town and country. So in France or Italy, or I don't know about Spain, but I know in France and Italy, a lot of people are there who they might live in Paris, they might live in Florence, but when you say where you're from, or when my family's from this village, even if our family's been in Paris for 4 generations, we still have this connection to somewhere rural. Whereas that link in Scotland was very broken. So we have people, we have this real split between people who've, always lived in rural Scotland, and these people who've always lived in urban Scotland. And really the two don't connect very well. So
no, exactly. I live in Rennes in Brittany, and people identify themselves often as more Breton than French. But there's a really deep attachment to the land, and even living in a place like Rennes, I can get on my bike, and in 10 minutes I'm essentially in the country. And so. People have access to that, and so much more easily. What do you? What is your view on genetically modified foods here in France? I remember a few years ago, some of it, there was something to do with genetically modified food, and they talked about the contamination of genetically modified food, our food's being contaminated, when in America you wouldn't use that terminology. What's your view on it? Can it be a good thing? Is it, how do you see it?
Basically, it's a hammer in search of a nail. That Mark Twain proverb, if the only tool you've got is a hammer, every problem looks like a nail.
Yeah.
So genetically modified food is an answer, but what's the question? What's the question it's an answer to? And that's always quite difficult to find. So genetically modified soy is an answer to the question about, how can we drench our fields in herbicide and still grow soy? Well, I know what, we'll invent a soy that you can spray herbicide on and doesn't kill it. So we can spray herbicide all over the paddock, and it doesn't affect our soy. Now that's a really weird problem to have. Do you know what I mean? Yeah. So we've invented a problem which allows us to kill all the other plants in the field, but not kill this thing that we've modified to be glyphosate resistant. And in a sense, the problem that's really trying to solve is, how do we create a product that you have to buy both bits of? It's like, if you want to buy I'm not going to name the brand, but once buy a certain
I know who you mean. 2 of them.
you buy a cheap printer, you think 59 quid for a printer, that's fantastic, and then the cartridge costs you 60 quid, and if you put if you don't buy the right cartridge, the printer blows up. It's that sort of thing with soy. You've got to buy the Roundup, and you've got to buy this.
Yeah, that's a very illustrative analogy, because a lot of times the seeds, like they only last once, so the farmers have to buy a whole new set of seeds for the next year.
But you don't own the seeds. The seeds are still owned by the companies. They're not your seeds anymore. Whereas we talked to some great people in France a couple of days ago. They're down near Lyon, and they have a fantastic project there, which is all about breeding, but also retaining varieties that are particular area, that suit their soil, suit the climate, are diverse. And the problem with the GM stuff is, had a big argument with somebody about GM aubergine, GM brinjal, because, and it was about solving this particular pest problem, which you can solve in lots of different ways. You don't have to do GM to solve it, right? You don't have to GM. But the problem is, even if you found this GM brinjal, GM aubergine that was like great, you then have one aubergine that looks the same. The aubergines we have in the UK tend to be all purple and all the same size. You go to another country, they have 20 different sort of aubergines. They're all different colors, different shapes, So do you want our food system to all look exactly the same? An aubergine in the UK is the same as an aubergine in Indonesia, the same as an aubergine in Mexico. Or do we want the diversity, the sheer joy of having difference, apart from the fact that when the next pest comes along, if you've got 30 different sorts of aubergine, one of them is going to be much better resisting it than the rest,
Yeah. Okay. And questions that came up a couple of times are GM crops the answer to solving world hunger? Given that it's getting a lot hotter, there's a lot of terrain that's not going to be arable, in the future, and maybe I mean, being able to working with genetically modified food could be an answer to that. I have no proposed.
Yeah, no, that's wrong question again. I mean, there's no shortage of food in the world.
Okay.
End of, and there's no technical difficulty in producing more than enough food for everybody. We haven't even begun to sort of, we're nowhere near testing the limits of how much food we could produce in this world if we wanted to. The reason people are hungry is they don't have any money. There's no other reason people are hungry. They're hungry because they don't have any money. There is no shortage of food in the world. We pay lots of farmers, basically not to produce food. Yeah. In the north of the world, we've taken huge areas of land out of production recently. We've put them into trees. There's huge productivity gaps. We could increase productivity, double productivity, and there's still lots of land in the world that's not being used, that's rain-fed, suitable for agriculture. So there really isn't a production problem in the world.
Okay, that segues perfectly into my next question regarding the why are a lot of shops emptier than usual at the moment? And I think Brexit comes to mind pretty readily. But how do you see it in terms of both the shortages in the shops, and also what that reflects in terms of the economy, the food system, etc.
Yeah, I mean, there is so no upside to Brexit. There's simply nothing good you can say about Brexit. End of. It was a project of mendacity, greed, the deregulatory agenda proposed by a very small group, which then sold the project to a whole bunch of people with a sort of whole bunch of half-truths and myths and lies. And, there's just nothing good to be said about it, I'm afraid. Mm-hmm. But in terms of the food system, it's not surprising that if you make people unwelcome, they don't want to come work for you. Mm-hmm. So it's not surprising that we're short of lorry drivers. So we actually can't get the stuff we can't bring it over to put it on the shelves. Prices have gone up. We run a small farm shop. We import veg from Europe. It takes a day longer to get in. There used to be. I mean, it didn't stop when Brexit came. We were worried it would completely stop, but the supplies got through. But it takes a day longer to get here. It's more expensive. There's more paperwork for everybody. It adds no value at all. And sure, we can absolutely grow more of that veg ourselves here if we want. We're very keen in Nourish on developing the glasshouse sector in Scotland again. There was quite a thriving glasshouse sector in the 70s. When oil prices went up, we hadn't really invested in it, and unlike the Dutch, so it sort of disappeared. We're really keen to revive that sector and to use renewable energy, which we got a shed load of, to grow our tomatoes again, and our cucumbers and our aubergines and our Mediterranean vegetables. Grow it in Orkney, grow it in Skye, grow it in Argyll. Actually get veg closer to people. Yeah. But that whole idea, there's so for particular things, there's some good reasons why it makes sense to grow, more of our stuff within Scotland, within the UK. But we didn't need to do Brexit to do that.
Yeah. Okay. And let's see. And okay. And how have the food standards changed, or what is? I mean, with Brexit, or are they still the same? But then they can be modified by the UK government, or how do you see that in terms of again the food regulations and safety regulations and this type?
Yeah. Well, I mean, lots of things. Obviously, we've got different strands. That we've got the trade agreements. The most recent one, obviously, with Australia, and some real concerns there that all the promises about we'd never reduce standards have been broken already. We're going to see the same with the Mercosur agreement, and it's just a replay of the repeal of the Corn Laws in the 1830s and 1840s, where, the UK government was much more interested in keeping food cheap and keeping wages down than they were in supporting indigenous food production. And that's been, that's why.
Yeah, tell me a little bit about the Corn Laws. I'd seen reference to them, but I wasn't. And was that at the same time as the Enclosure Acts, or how? Maybe my connection is not valid, but
basically when 1830s, dash for gas, the whole industrialization was really kicking off. UK was seeing competition from Germany in particular and emerging from the US. They wanted to keep their factories, running. They wanted to keep wages down. So, and at that point, food was about 70% of the wages. People were spending 70% of their income on food. So if you could keep the price of bread down, you could keep wages down. And at that point, markets were opening up in the Ukraine, in Russia, in the US, Canada. The price of carting stuff across the sea had gone down. You could get more stuff here quicker with the steamships. So you've got that perfect storm in the sense that the price of imports, you could hold it down as long as you took the tariffs off. Before that, we had tariffs on imports. But if you took the tariffs off, then you could import corn cheaper, into the UK than people could grow in the UK. So the whole battle about the corn was do we look after the farmers and the landowners, or do we look after the industrialists? And we went with the industrialists. And that's been a reflection of, if you like, a cheap food culture in the UK that's just been there ever since. So we, as people, we spend less of our disposable income on food than most people in Europe, certainly than French and Italian and Spanish people. So we don't think it's, we try to reduce the amount we spend on food, and that so that's been one reason why we're food standards are less important in some ways than cheap food for the UK government. But the other thing, obviously, that's happening in terms of the question in the chat about what we can do under Scots law. Trade obviously is reserved at the moment. So although we've got a sort of quite good embryonic sort of shadow trade policy in Scotland, we obviously can't implement that. So we can't change those standards for stuff down to the UK. And then even if we tried to do something under Scots law, we've now got the Internal Market Act, which means that essentially any attempt to differentiate standards between Scotland and England is subject to legal challenge. And that challenge probably wouldn't be decided in the courts. It would be decided by an administrative office that's part of the Competition Markets Authority. So it does constrain Scottish government's freedom to operate in that sector, definitely.
Okay, let's get on to the subject of food sovereignty, and I believe the viewers saw a short a paragraph about food sovereignty for Scotland. But how would you define it in your own words?
Well, for me, food sovereignty, and it's a phrase that's come very much from the global South, from Latin America, and from indigenous peoples around the world, and it was sort of defined in a big meeting in Mali, I think it was a few years ago. But one person explained it to me as was, food sovereignty is about you feed yourself and your family first, then you feed your village, then you feed the city, and then if you've got stuff left, you export it. And that is, for me, that sort of sums it up, that you concentrate your food policy on how do we nourish our own people, and then how do we export what we don't need, and help other people who either can't grow what we can grow, or have more people than land, so we need to shift the food around. But that's not how a lot of previous colonies are still having to operate under, if you like, a neo-colonial model where the emphasis is on producing crops for export and not so much on producing nourishing food for people. And a lot of small farmers around the world are sort of trying to challenge that and go, no, we need to feed our own people. So there's farmers all over the world in different organizations who sort of try to change their focus towards saying, no, we're going to try and produce healthy food for people near where we live, rather than sugar, rather than tobacco. We were talking to some people from Malawi recently who shifted from tobacco to macadamia nuts, but before that, the emphasis was produce tobacco as a cash crop, export it, and then use that money to buy food. But often we're ending up buying food that was produced in another country, wasn't your own, wasn't your own native seeds, wasn't your own culture, so that real displacement between what we grow and what we eat, that and food sovereignty is trying to bring those things closer together. But we have the same issue in Scotland, like you were saying earlier on about markets and stuff. We produce a lot of veg, but we export most of them. We for example, we use a huge amount of our land for lamb, for sheep and lamb. And we think that's sort of really traditional, but actually it's not. We've always had sheep in the borders, but they were grown for wool. But this idea about producing sheep for meat is really relatively recent. It's something nobody in Scotland eats lamb. If you talk to butchers in Scotland, they say the people who eat the lamb are the English people who've moved to Scotland. But it's just not part of, the Scottish diet. And yet a lot of our land is used for that. So we have this mismatch between what we produce and what we eat. Same with fishing. People say, well, 90% of the fish we land, we export. 90% of the fish we eat, we import. So this sort of mismatch, our food system isn't designed in any way to, to nourish the people of Scotland. And food policy has been very much geared towards export. The whole policy for Scotland Food and Drink used to be export first. In the last 2 years, it's really interesting that policy has pivoted. So when you read their post-COVID policy, it says produce for the local market first and then export. And that's been really interesting. And it's to some extent, it's a reflection of COVID, because all over the world, people have been waking up during the pandemic, during lockdown, and gone, so, why is there no local food here? Why can't we get food? Well, we can't get food because we're relying on really long food chains. And we're exporting the food from near to where we live to somewhere else. And then we're importing food from a long way away to here. And a lot of people in COVID woke up and thought, I'm not sure this system's helping us. And I'm not sure it's helping the farmers.
Okay, and let's see. And for Nourish Scotland, what progress have you made in terms of affecting policy upon, establishing or reestablishing food sovereignty in Scotland? What are some of the positive policy initiatives you've proposed? What's been the reaction of the Scottish government or even the UK government? Just give us a little idea of where you are in establishing food sovereignty in Scotland.
Yeah, our sort of flagship policy is around the right to food, and the right to food. It sort of sounds like a slogan, like the right to party, but it's part of international law. It's set out in international law, and it's set out in a treaty that we've signed as a UK government, but we're not bound by, because we haven't ratified it into UK domestic law. So this idea about the right to food is very much that saying, government's got a duty to make sure that people can eat well, and to do that in a way that's sustainable now and into the future. But the government should actually manage the food system so that it delivers what people need, rather than what food businesses find it most profitable to do. Which means you have to change the rules of the game so that what food businesses do is more what we need. Unless, as I say, under current rules, what it's profitable to do. So what the right to food does is it places duties on government to ensure that people are well nourished.
Okay,
and that's fundamental to food sovereignty, because it's turning food policy upside down and saying, the purpose of the food system is to feed people well and to not screw up the planet any more than we have done already. And let's run the food system as if that's what we meant to do. Okay.
All right. And what can the Scottish government do now under as a devolved parliament? And once it would once Scotland becomes independent and has full powers over things like food and food regulation and this type of thing, what policies could be adopted in an independent Scotland that would promote this and make it much more of a reality than it is currently?
Sure. Well, there are things it can do already. So we don't know going forward with things like the Internal Market Act and the Public Subsidy regulations. We don't know whether the Scottish government is going to be able to implement whatever agricultural support policy it wants, but at the moment it's able to do that. So it had devolved powers under the CAP, and it still has those devolved powers. So Scotland's had an agricultural, separate agricultural legislation for at least 100 years. So we've been able to make our agricultural policy, and we've also got control over land reform. So we could do a lot more with that policy to support small-scale farms, to support links between, farms and towns, to develop that side of the sort of food culture, which is about connecting citizens with farms, trying to create some of that thing that we take for granted in lots of Europe, but isn't here at the moment. And we can also do a lot to reduce the nutritional gap. We really have a two-tier food system in Scotland. So, if you're living on a low income, it's really hard to eat well. It really is. And so there's a big gap in terms of affordability that we need to close. So, and we have powers, we can do some of that. At the moment, there's a big campaign going on about the Scottish child payment and increasing that to £20 a week. It's really tough if you're on a low income to feed your kids well. And the Scottish government's brought in some good stuff with Best Start Foods, and increasing the value of that. But, if parents can't feed their kids well, then, you can't really get started.
That leads to all kinds of all kinds of societal problems, and the stunted growth, and just the deep concern that the mothers have, and the parents have, and the kids, and that the stress, the anxiety, it all has this kind of cascading effect over society.
Yeah, it's a really good point, Mark. We did a little bit of work a few years ago with where we went and talked to children, and we didn't ask them about their experience, but we created this imaginary family, and we talked to them about this family, and we said, oh, look, this has happened, and there's no food in the cupboard. What do you think? What do you think about that? And the kids, these were like 7, 8-year-old kids, and you just think, oh, they're so smart kids, they're so thoughtful. And they said, I'd be worried for my mum because she'd be worried. Yeah. If I was that child, I'd be worried because my mum would be worried. Yeah. Not I'd be worried that I wouldn't have food, but I'd know that my mum was stressed about this. And I think that. So I think you're absolutely right. This thing about the foundation is that kids can grow up, not having to worry about where the next meal comes from, and being able to have a variety of foods and enjoy food and start off with a sort of happy relationship with food is like really, really the basis of the whole thing. And Scottish government do quite a lot on that. What it can't do much about, obviously, is trade, and that's hugely important. We were talking about the food standards earlier on, and until we have our own trade policy, it's going to be really hard to put our money where our mouth is on that. I think that is true. And also, the other thing which I think is problematic for Scottish government is that the big food companies are all UK based, and particularly the multiple retailers are UK-wide companies. We don't have a headquartered big multiple retailer in Scotland, and I think that's a weakness, and I think if we had a publicly owned retailer first choice, it's hard to run a retail company. It's a really tough market there. You need skills, but having a publicly owned retailer in the mix, I think, would be really helpful. But it would allow you to set really high standards in terms of wages and labor and sourcing policies, and I think that would be a great thing to have a look at. But again, easier with independence, but possible probably without. I think obviously, the big thing for us would be getting back into Europe, because Europe is now, they developed the farm to fork policy a couple of years ago, and they're now starting to look at a sustainable food law, which would provide this sort of framework, just like we're trying to get a bill in Scotland, a Good Food Nation bill. In the EU, they're trying to get this sustainable food law in place, which would really, they won't call it food sovereignty, but it's very much about trying to legislate for a sustainable food system, something that can take human health into account, but also really importantly these issues about climate and nature, because the food system is the most destructive system in terms of climate and nature. We use so much land.
Particularly livestock is from what I've understand. livestock is more destructive than, say, fruit and veg. But how do you? Is that the case?
It's a number of different things. Obviously,
Sure.
We're still doing a huge amount of deforestation, and a lot of that deforestation is still for soya. Some of it's for palm oil, but some of it's for soya. And then, that soy is used to feed particularly chickens, but also to some extent pigs and to some extent dairy cows. So we're basically then producing this really high quality protein, soya, and then we're feeding it to livestock, and even the most efficient chicken, and efficient chicken means miserable chicken. I mean, it means chicken that
crammed into really tight confines, fed whatever gets them big enough to cut up.
If you're a chicken born today, right, in one of these systems, you're dead by the end of September.
Wow. Okay.
Right.
Wow.
And that would be a slow growing chicken, right? So the last 25th.
I didn't know that.
So that's the life you have. You're born, you live in a shed with 10,000 other chickens, and then somebody picks you up and you put on a line and you go through a path of.
I've read articles about working in slaughterhouses. Yeah. It's
if that's what it takes, let's have lab meat any day. If that's how we have to keep animals to eat meat, I don't think we should be doing that. But Nourish is not anti-meat. We're just saying we have to have less and better meat, and there are livestock systems that are high welfare where the animals genuinely have lives worth living. What we used to say on the farm is, our goal was that our don't have a bad day in their lives.
Yeah.
We think that's, we're very low key. Our animals eat grass. We can't eat the grass. The animals eat the grass. The calves are born. They stay with their mom. They never leave their mom. They never leave the farm. Nobody ever shouts at them. They their last day, they go in a trailer. They go to slaughterhouse. They follow the next cow around the corner, and they get killed. And they get killed within 5 seconds. And they don't know it's coming. Now that's like, I can quite understand people don't want to eat meat at all. They don't like to kill animals. But if you're gonna do animals, having them eat grass, having them have this sort of quite, a life where you go out, you can browse the trees, you can be with a herd, you can express your natural behavior, you can sleep where you want, you all of that stuff that people, the best animal systems have. I think you can sort of say, well, these animals had lives worth living. So,
wow. So it's very profound. I hadn't heard it expressed that way. Okay. I want to just round off a question we just addressed a few minutes ago regarding the big supermarkets and how they do get a lot of flack. But how do you view the big supermarkets? You said that none of them are headquartered in Scotland. And how do you view their effect on the overall food system? And what are the positives and negatives?
Yeah, the positive and negative. I mean, the positives is that, they're big beasts. So when they change, a lot of change happens. And at the moment, really all the big supermarkets in the UK are under considerable pressure, both from their boards and their shareholders, but also for their investors to get their act together. So we've seen Tesco's, commit to reduce the environmental footprint in their shopping basket and to make their shopping basket healthier. We've seen Sainsbury's come out with healthy food pledges. We've seen the Co-op come out with environmental pledges. So we're seeing these, really quite ambitious pledges from the big companies because their shareholders are saying you need to do this, and because their investors are saying you need to do this. So the advantage of it is when they change, big change happens, which is great. The disadvantage is that you have this huge imbalance of power between, even the biggest farmers and the supermarkets, and some of the contracts that get signed are really unfair, so you get these, and you get industry practices that build up, like grading out a huge amount of produce that then gets plowed back in. I think in Europe we eat half the apples we grow or something like that. The rest get, so there's a lot of built-in waste in at the farm level through these systems. But I think the most important thing is that they dominate the market. They squeeze out a lot of the independent people, but they also provide this real sort of veil between people and food. So, so they don't make food transparent; they make it opaque. You know,
right. Yeah.
So you know, if you take chicken as an example, you know, most people have never seen an industrial chicken. So the most common.
You mean alive or
alive?
Yeah, yeah.
You know, I mean, have you ever seen one?
No. I've seen a few chickens. I had a friend who had a few chickens in different species.
Yeah. And we all think they're like the hens.
I've read about, you know, what goes on in some of these chicken processing plants, but no, I've never seen that.
The animals don't look, and you know, we're used to hens that scratch around in the garden, and you know, cocky locky, the sky's falling, and little brown hen, and all that. That's what we think a hen is.
Yeah.
That's not what a chicken is that we buy in the shops. It's a monster. We grew some for a bit. We had to. We stopped doing it because it was like we couldn't get a breed that was slow growing enough to make us feel okay about it. But
okay.
They're huge. They're huge, and they're white, and they have red feet.
Yeah,
they're just not like the things that we think chickens are. So we've got this, and the problem is that we've got this complete sanitization and disconnect between what is actually going to food and then what we end up being presented with in supermarkets. And obviously a lot of processing, a lot of stuff that ends up in supermarkets that's highly processed stuff you couldn't make at home. You know, you really couldn't, because you don't have emulsifiers, you don't have soy lecithin, you don't have the sort of technology to make some of these processed foods. So that way that the long food chains we have disguise, you know, the origins of the food. They come between us and the producer, and they separate those by a mile. And I think, you know, if you take the things supermarkets have done, you know, you can see why they do it, but inventing unreal farms that don't exist. You know, Wood Farm doesn't exist. You know, it's not Real Farm. It's a brand, but it's not an actual farm. But you know, persuaded now, you know, there's a sort of happy farmer who's dolphin friendly.
Old Farmer Brown puttering around the barnyard. Kind of
and you know, the fact that, you know, you might have migrant labourers working 14 hours a day, you know, harvesting these carrots or something, and you know, we disguise and sanitize a lot of the food system, and the problem is that you know, because we've become so disconnected, we sort of collude in this conspiracy with the supermarkets, I think, to some extent, you know. And so I'm not saying they're bad people. I'm just saying that the effect of this consolidation of the market means that they have huge power, and it also means that they contribute to us losing that food culture and that sense of actually understanding very much about the food system, because they don't really want to, you know, if we knew more about the food system, we might make some different decisions about what we do, you know. So
okay. I've been going through a few of the questions. How do we encourage Scottish producers not to succumb to the pressure of Tesco and the likes? And we've had similar things in France. I mean, you have Leclerc and Auchan and the other, you know, huge supermarkets, and you've had, you know, big protests by the milk producers. But I don't know. You know, I have no view on whether it's better handled in Scotland. But what is your view on that, and how? Basically, how you as a farmer, how well are you or your colleagues able to stand up against the big, you know, the big supermarkets in terms of, you know, price fixing or this type of thing?
Yeah, I mean, it is a real challenge, you know, because for a lot of farmers, the way the farm's structured, the business model is you sell to supermarkets, or you sell to the wholesalers who sell to supermarkets, you know, and like I was saying earlier, you've got too much produce to be able to sell it in a farmer's market. We don't have a lot of independent shops to sell through, so your routes to market are really limited. What we usually say on the farm here, we have maybe, you know, 500 to 1,000 customers. You know, the average farmer in Scotland has one customer, or if they're lucky to sell to two multiples, they have two customers. That's it. So those customers, you know, are hugely powerful. So what we've missed in, you know, in Scotland is other ways for farmers to get their stuff to market. In France, you've got this really active AMAP scheme, you know, with citizens supporting farmers. As you said earlier, you've got farmers markets. You've got more ways in which people can get their stuff sold. You've got the network of biologique supermarkets. I can't remember what it's called, but it's there's another alternative there. We just have few alternatives. People are trying to build those alternatives. So people like Green City Whole Foods, Locavore in Glasgow, Franco Maggiotto in Edinburgh. You have people who have, really gone out of their way to try to source directly from Scottish farmers. But we need to build that whole bit of the economy up. What we have at home is we still have about 200 families who they pay the farm every month, maybe 40, 50, 60 quid a month. Sometimes they spend all of that on food. Sometimes they spend more than that. Sometimes they spend less than that. And over the year, it balances out. So, and what that means is we know we've got that income coming in. We can budget for that. And they're supporting the farm. They're saying, look, we may not buy so much this month, but we'll buy more next month, or we'll buy, So that trust between citizens and farmers, is really precious. And I think we need to keep finding more ways of connecting people to farms so that they can, so they can feel that they're supporting the sort of farming they want to see. But also they know, that sense of when you're a farmer, it's such a privilege to be able to sell people food. It's extraordinary. When we first started doing it, that sense that we're organic, because I couldn't face the thought of putting pesticides on the food and then giving it to people, So we're organic by default, because we just thought, this would be really weird.
I'm not gonna sell that. I mean, I'm not gonna put poison on it and sell it to people I know and care about. It seems
exactly.
pretty
People that was exactly the thing that maybe if it's going on a lorry and you don't know the people, it doesn't feel so bad. But when you know people, they come into the shop and they go, I'd like some salad. You don't want to put slug pellets on it. You just really don't.
Yeah. I have I live in Wren, and just about 10 kilometers outside, I have a workshop in an old pig farm. And there's a farmer that I talk to sometimes who's there, and he has baskets of vegetables that he sells, every week or every month to people who pay a certain amount of money. It's similar to what you were talking about, but it's like a basket of ones to individuals. And I say, I'd like that. He said, no, I can't. Got enough. Can't do it. So he was refusing business. He could have gotten a few extra euros, for some veggies. But I'm really admirative of people who farm that way and have that conscience, and that they want to look after the people that support them, and I think it's such a lovely way of doing things. But anyway, okay. Let me see. Let's see. For those watching who are concerned about the lack of resilience in Scotland's food supply, what can they do to help? What do you think individuals can do to, to ameliorate the system and to establish more food sovereignty in Scotland? What are what can individuals do?
Yeah, and I mean, we sort of, obviously you can do something, personally with your household income, whatever that is, to try and buy something from a farmer. That always helps, but, the way the system's structured, often buying local food ends up being more expensive than buying something that's, you can pick up in a supermarket. So, we never go at Nourish, well, you ought to do this or you ought to do that. People have to make their own decisions about where, how far they feel they can, spend their household budget differently. Some people are really up against it. Some people have a lot more flexibility. So if you have more flexibility and you can support, a farmer's market, or connect up with a local farm, or get a veg box, or, then do that. That's part of your contribution. But the more important thing people can do, quite honestly, is to join organizations. You can join Nourish, obviously, but nearly most of the local authorities in Scotland.
So just so our viewers know, Nourish Scotland. Do you have a website that people can access?
NourishScotland.org, and go on there. There's loads of stuff to read and videos to watch, and you can become a member of Nourish Scotland. That'd be lovely.
So certainly, I encourage our viewers to do that. Find out more about food and so please, obviously, I have to let you have plugs for your.
Yeah, no, I mean, we're not. but there's also like every city pretty much in Scotland, every town now has a sort of group that's looking at sustainable food. Mm-hmm. So you've got one in Glasgow, you've got one in Edinburgh, you've got one in Dundee, you've got one in Aberdeen, you've got one in Clacks, one in Fife, one in, lots of different parts of Scotland now have a sort of sustainable food group that the council.
And what are they doing other than meeting together and talking? What are they do? What are they starting to do to?
It's things like opening up more land for urban growing. Mm-hmm. We've got a huge amount of land per person in Scotland. And Dundee, the food group in Dundee, they worked out that if you just grew veg on some of the land you've got in Dundee, even without digging up the golf courses, whatever you think about golf courses, but even with just using the land that wasn't really doing very much, you could pretty much grow the fruit and veg for people in Dundee, within the city. Wow. So that's one really concrete thing about getting.
And have they started actually doing that? Have they started, getting? And I'm wondering if that raises issues with the local council. I mean, do they have to get permission? I mean, or is it
We're encouraging the local council to do that. So Glasgow's had a good scheme for the last few years of they've called it stalled spaces. Bits of Glasgow where sure it's going to get developed, but not today, not next week, and they've made that available for growing. We're really keen to see the sort of small market garden people, so the people who are growing food for a living, to give them a chance. We love community gardens and all that stuff, but if you want to actually grow a lot of food, you need somebody whose job it is to grow that food, and they need to be really skilled at doing that. We've spent 20 years nearly growing stuff here. It's a hard thing to learn. I mean, if you want to grow food, vegetables, and make some money out of it, you've got to be really, really good at it. It's a bit like you can play the guitar and get away in the pub, but if you want to get paid to play the guitar, you have to be shit hot, and it's the same with growing food. Anybody can grow a couple of courgettes.
Maybe Jimi Hendrix.
That's right. You want
the Jimi Hendrix of food production. That would have some bizarre vegetables coming out of it.
Yeah. So I think we're really keen to see sort of more market gardens in the cities, around cities. The other sort of things they're doing, doing a lot of work with schools. We could go a lot further with school food in Scotland. We're just on the point of trying to move that more towards sourcing local, sourcing organic. Sorry.
You warned us about that. Wow, you got off light. He had warned us about this, that there would be a canine interruption at some point. So we'll get back to him as soon as the barking dies down. It's when his dog arrives. I believe it's when his wife arrives and the dog barks at her as if she's a complete stranger, on a regular basis. So I believe that's what's transpiring right now. But I know he will join us as soon as he can, as soon as the barking subsides. Pending that, are you there? Are you back?
Yeah, I'm back now, Mark.
Oh, good.
That's Heather in the door, so good. But yeah,
how long did the canine interruption last this evening?
It was only 30 seconds of I've never seen this woman before. What's she doing in my house? But she's back now. She's crazy.
Yeah.
In terms of what people can do.
Sorry, but woof makes more sense than the unionists. So I just want to say I before we wrap this up, I've seen all of the lovely comments that appear at the bottom of the screen. I'm so sorry we couldn't have addressed it, but I'm really encouraged by the positive response that we've gotten from this conversation. So, in the time remaining, what else would you like to say about food sovereignty and about the realistic prospects of actually making it happen? I think there's, in my own observation of Scottish society, again, from my time that I spent many years ago, in the East End of Glasgow, looking at and just marveling at the greasiness of the food and saying, where are the fresh veggies? Where are the, and people dying. I remember, dying of heart attacks at 50 on a regular basis, obesity, cholesterol, high blood pressure, and you add the cigarettes and the booze, and that certainly doesn't help. But how? but more recently, I've gone and the quality of food in Glasgow restaurants, stuff like that, is so much different than what I experienced before. So I think there have been improvements, but how feasibly realistic is it to have this type of food sovereignty, and what are the main policy objectives that the government needs to do to support it? Because obviously it involves the help of individuals, and it's not simply a policy that the Scottish government or any government can just enact automatically. It has to have support, but I think there's a lot. I think there potentially is a huge amount for that.
So next couple of weeks, we'll see Programme for Government come out for the first for the Parliament, and we're hoping we're not completely confident, but we're very hopeful that the Good Food Nation Bill will be part of that. So the Good Food Nation Bill is very much about trying to put these ideas into law, that the food system should be there to nourish people. It should be there to look after the planet, to look after nature, to create good jobs in food, so that working in food is seen as a valued thing to do. So that bringing together food policy under Good Food Nation Bill, we're really optimistic about. But you're absolutely right. You can pass the law, but it'll take a generation to make a big difference. The Nordic countries introduced something called the New Nordic Diet 20 years ago, and there was a whole raft of different policies, from preschoolers, supporting antenatal nutrition, nutrition for older people, public procurement, different farm support policies. You have to do all of those things to change food over time. And you're absolutely right. The restaurant scene in Glasgow is completely different from what it was 20 or 30 years ago. The whole way that we've had people from different cultures coming to, particularly to Glasgow, but to Scotland as a whole, bringing just new ideas, new energy into the food system, making.
The Indian food's just amazing. Indian food's one of my favorites. So
so we've got this potential to make food in Scotland. The reason people come to Scotland rather than the reason they don't come to Scotland. And we've got so much energy in the system. When you go to Glasgow, every time you go back, there's another community garden started, there's another few projects started, there's just so much interest in this in Scotland. So we do have this great potential, but it's going to take time. It's going to take time. You can't change 200 years of culture overnight.
But in your view, it's moving in the right direction.
It's completely moving in the right direction, and it's potentially really exciting. And I have to say, we get frustrated at things moving so slowly. We obviously have lots of colleagues working in other parts of the UK, and they go, "Oh God, could we move to Scotland? Things are going really well there." So even though we think it's bad, actually things are moving along. There's a real, you can see the difficulties for Scottish government. It's not an easy thing to change. We're hoping that they're going to be really bold in this new Parliament, because some of these deep-rooted problems, like people dying young, like you're saying, because of diet, we haven't made as much progress on them as we should have done. And you're not going to make progress if you keep just doing the same things you've always done. So we need to do some new things. Somebody said in the chat, we shouldn't have food banks. We should have people, farmers growing veg for people. That's absolutely right. There's parts of France where they've got projects doing just that. The local government is paying the farmers to bring fresh veg into the cities, and actually people are paying. They have a special card, so they pay less, or they get it for nothing. But it's a dignified approach. It's not a food bank where you just get given whatever there is.
Or humiliating, or the stigma of receiving benefits and stuff like that.
So there's no reason at all why we can't. Brazil started it, Belo Horizonte, years ago, where they basically paid small family farms to reduce hunger by producing fresh food for local people. We could do that if we wanted to. We could do lots of things, and this next 5 years has to be a real explosion of experimentation.
Do you think independence is required from that? And I wanted to touch on this also, the possibility of joining EFTA rather than the EU, at least in the short term, would that help to ameliorate things? In turn.
For us, EFTA is a trade association. EU's a political project, and I think the political project at the moment on food is heading in the right direction. It's always going to be slow, the EU, but it is moving towards a way of doing food that's genuinely more sustainable, better for people, better for planet. And I think Scotland would both contribute to that, but also benefit from that political process. But yeah, we independence would absolutely help. Not least because we would also, rejoin the EU, but also rejoin other international bodies, like the Food and Agriculture Organization, which we should be part of. But we can do a lot. We can do a lot before then. I really think we can do a lot before then.
Okay. All right. Is there anything you'd like to add before we say goodbye to our lovely viewers?
No, just thank you everybody for listening. And the person who's interested in hemp, absolutely. It's a crop whose time has come, and there's a lot of farmers in Scotland now starting to grow on a small scale, and we're just looking at the barriers to scaling up, which are all as you'd expect to with processing and supply chain.
With regard to hemp, I mean that was a couple hundred years ago. That was grown so broadly and was so useful for oil, for obviously its medicinal qualities, rope. Fabric, and from what I understand, I read a book, The Emperor's Clothes or something like that about it. And from what I understand, I think it was the 1930s, the DuPont company, other big American multinationals, led a campaign against it because they didn't want to compete with hemp, for things, or even paper. Paper can be made with hemp massively easier than with wood. I mean, the production is, much beyond that. So, I mean, it apart from its medicinal purposes, I mean, its practical usage that has been lost since it was made illegal by the United States. And I guess the United States told everybody else they better make it illegal too, or else
all got tied up with the war on drugs. And we could talk about that for a long time. It's a really useful crop, grows well in Scotland. As you say, there's a lovely new Scottish startup that's making insulation products from hemp. So you're locking up carbon with growing the hemp, and then you stick it in your house instead of sticking in, synthetics, and plastic-based insulation products. You're sticking in a natural product. It lasts a long time. It does a good job, and you're basically storing carbon in your house. So, what could be better?
Yeah. Okay. All right. Let's see. So, if you want to look through the questions, if there's anything else you want to address before you make any kind of closing statement.
Okay, so a quick one about young farmers coming into the industry.
Yeah,
a lot of people want to get in, but as we said earlier, they don't have access to land is tough. Access to funding to get started is tough at the moment, but also access to skills and training. We don't make it a career that's valued. So particularly if you want to do things like veg growing, the only way you sort of learn at the moment in Scotland is you have to learn on the job, whereas in other European countries, the Netherlands, for example, it's seen as a proper career. You go and learn how to do this properly. So I think there are young people who want to get in, but we don't really have a training process or a career structure for them. And I think we do a disservice to farming if we don't think it's worthy of a career. If we just think, oh well, anybody can do it.
Yeah, and just quickly, do you have a need for migrant laborers on your farm, and have you suffered from a shortage of them?
No, farm. We're too small to worry about that. There obviously are shortages in other parts of Scotland, and to be honest, I suppose our view would be that it shouldn't be anybody's job to have to do a job that a machine could do. If your job is simply one part of a process and your job is to pick leeks up out of the ground and cut the leaves off them and put them in a box, and that's what you do 12 hours a day, that's not human flourishing for us. That's not a job that, it's understandable people want to do that job. And the fact that we can still rely on migrant workers from, the Ukraine or something to come and do that job because their wages are so poor. We need in the longer term either to have much smaller scale veg production, so the jobs are more interesting, more varied, or we get robots to do it. But the relying on this sort of very 19th century model of, manual labor, where the only bit of the job you do is one task and you're alienated from the rest of the supply chain. That's not
or fulfilling life. I mean, if you live in a trailer and migrate from Romania or whatever every year, and send the money back to it's just it wouldn't be a very fulfilling life. Okay, anything else? Anything you'd like to say before we say goodbye?
No, it's been great, Mark. I'm sorry.
This is one of the coolest conversations I've ever had. And definitely the coolest conversation about agriculture, bar none. But really interesting, And I can see from the number of comments, I'm sure that Paul will confirm this, that this has been a very well received. So just again, nourishscotland.org is the website they need to go to and get involved. Buy good food from local farmers, make the effort. Also, learn to cook differently from different cultures. I mean, again, veggie Indian's fantastic. Make your own naan, make your own dal. It's awesome. I do it myself. And I hope that, within a few years living in France and having this amazing food culture, that a lot of that could be learned and replicated in Scotland, because you deserve it as a people. You deserve it to be healthier, to live longer, to eat better, to not have the effects of having a chippy most days because it's the cheapest thing around, and it gives you enough calories to live on, but hardens your arteries, all of these things. So and it's up to you, our viewers and others, to make that happen. The government cannot simply impose any law that will make this stuff change like magic. It has to be done. In France, it's been centuries that they've been at this, and very highly regarded for it. So okay. If there's anything else, if there's nothing else you'd like to say, we'll just say goodbye for the evening to our viewers, and just thank you so much for being with us this evening.
You're welcome, Mark. Thanks very much for having me on.
Okay.
It's good. All right. See you
Absolute
soon.
pleasure. Yeah.